In times of universal deceit, truth is the only rebellion left. Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Everett Piper, and this is The Rebellion. Today's episode will focus on the issue of the No Kings riots, and I use that word intentionally, riots rather than protests, because that's what they are. When you see a bunch of people standing on top of burning cars with devastation in the background, burning buildings, broken windows, devastated streets, police at bay, being attacked, if not subdued. When you see somebody standing on top of these cars in the midst of this chaos, waving the flag of a foreign nation, the Mexican flag, for example, that's a riot. That's an insurrection. That is not a peaceful protest, no matter what the mainstream media is telling you. This No Kings movement has a history, and that's what we're going to talk about today. George Santayana, the philosopher, said, "He who does not learn the lessons of history is doomed to repeat them." We need to learn the historical significance of other No Kings movements and what they led to, and what chaos was left in their wake when they dethroned the king with no replacement but themselves to put on that throne and to claim authority over everybody else. Today's episode is on the No Kings movement. I'm titling it No Kings and Chaos. Before we get into it, however, I want to remind you that our sponsor for the rebellion is equippingthepersecuted.org. The Ministry of Equipping the Persecuted serves our brothers and sisters in Nigeria, the nation where more persecution, more murdering, more martyring of Christians is taking place than any place else on the face of the earth right now. Our brothers and sisters, by the tens of thousands, are being killed for their faith in Nigeria. And Equipping the Persecuted goes in and provides orphanages to their children, the survivors of this martyrdom. They provide help to widows. They give food, other supplies, hospitals, schools, like I said, orphanages. Equipping the Persecuted goes in and helps with sustenance for these people that are suffering for their faith. In addition to that, as I've said many times before on the show, the thing that distinguishes Equipping the Persecuted over and above other organizations of like cause and mission is that they go in and provide security training. They teach these villagers, these people in these towns and communities in Nigeria how to defend themselves, how to secure their villages, and hopefully stop the persecution before it starts. Go to equippingthepersecuted.org, equippingthepersecuted.org, and make a tax-deductible gift today. That's equippingthepersecuted.org. Back to today's show. No Kings and Chaos. If you've been watching the past 2 weeks, and I'm sure all of you have, it's been in the news. Yes, there's other important news. As I speak right now, the news that is headlining newspapers and websites across the world is that Donald Trump has decided to use bunker buster bombs to eliminate the nuclear threat of Iran. By the way, sidebar, it doesn't have anything to do with today's show other than it's pertinent and within the context of a biblical worldview. Number one, I do think we are obligated to defend Israel. First, it's biblical. Second, they are in the right when it comes to the cause of defending themselves against the terrorism of Iran and its proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, etc. If you're not standing with Iran right now, if you're not standing with Israel right now against Iran, then what is wrong with you? October 7th, their country was invaded, literally invaded, and people were butchered. Women were raped. Babies were executed. People were taken as hostages. And the people of Hamas that are sponsored by Iran were celebrating this butchery. This anti-Semitism that is rising on our college campuses and around the world right now in celebration of this cause, of the cause of Hamas, the cause of Hezbollah, the cause of Iran, is horrific. And if you're a thoughtful, moral human being, even if you're not Christian, how can you not stand with the Israelis' right to defend their own borders and defend their people, to defend civilians who are being executed through this invasion? So yes, I do believe that the United States and Donald Trump, America's support of Israel, is biblical as well as moral. We could debate whether or not the preemptive strike, and I don't know if you want to call it preemptive or not, because Iran has been attacking the United States for decades. Let's not forget the fact that they have bombed sites where they knew Americans were present. Lebanon, during Ronald Reagan, they bombed a site where Marines were known to be housed, and some 100 plus, I can't remember right now, was it 150, 180 Americans were killed as the result of Iran's activities in Lebanon. We know of their activities in Syria. We know of Hezbollah. We know of Hamas. We know of their support of terrorism. They are bankrolling these terrorist regimes. And these regimes, as well as Iran specifically, the leadership of Iran has called for the death of America and the death of Israel, the death of the great Satan, United States of America, and the death of the little Satan, Israel. They are being very clear and explicit in what their intent is. To sit back and pretend that this isn't happening and this isn't real and that somehow we can negotiate our way out of this, like Neville Chamberlain in his negotiations with the Nazis, is a fool's errand in my view. We can talk about that in subsequent episodes, but how can I ignore it in today's broadcast? But let's get back to the No Kings chaos, because in many ways it's equally dangerous in terms of the precursor of what could come from these movements if we don't understand the context, the historical context of a No Kings movement. And if there's a No Kings movement, a movement to dethrone a king, and by the way, calling Donald Trump a king is absurd. It's ridiculous. The very people who are saying that they worship at the altar of democracy somehow forget to the fact that Donald Trump was elected by the majority of the people in the United States of America, and therefore it was a Democratic vote that brought Donald Trump to the presidency. They seem to forget that Donald Trump does not act unilaterally. Yes, he does have the right to executive orders, and yes, he does have the right to be the chief executive of the United States, the commander-in-chief of our military, within the parameters of the Constitution. And he's not acting outside of those parameters right now. So calling him a king and ignoring the fact that he is constrained by the Constitution and is living within its boundaries right now is absurd. Again, perhaps the topic for a subsequent episode. But the No Kings movement, any movement that is grounded in the premise that we are going to dethrone the king at all cost and replace him with what? Replace the king with what? Because no vacuum is going to be left unfilled. I've talked about that before. The elementary principle of physics is if you create a vacuum, it's going to be filled by something. So if you get rid of the king, what are you going to replace the king with in terms of the power to control the anarchy, to control the chaos? Because chaos cannot sustain itself. It never does. So today we're going to talk about other historical No Kings movements. And they exist. They're there. You know of them. If you've been watching the last couple of weeks' riots, you probably have a lingering sense of deja vu, together with a haunting feeling that there must be a fox in the henhouse. You've got two issues that are playing out in your conscious or your subconscious right now. Deja vu, and is there a fox in the henhouse in these movements? What's going on? Who's the wizard behind the curtain pulling the strings on these protests, these riots? Who's bankrolling them? But first, deja vu. The chaos is not without precedent. It's far from the grassroots movement that it's being portrayed to be in the mainstream news. But first, again, let's deal with the deja vu component, that issue, in terms of my commentary today. Because most of our current public schools have long since abandoned teaching anything remotely akin to an accurate version of world history. Most people today are either unaware that the anarchy we're witnessing in the streets of Philadelphia and Portland is unprecedented, or if they were aware of it, they've set it aside as a secondary issue because it's been downplayed in your history classes in your public schools for decades now. I'm going to say that again. Because of the terrible education in our public schools and the fact that our schools have abandoned teaching an accurate view of world history, they've deconstructed the facts of world history and reconstructed it in their progressive mindset and model. And that's what your kids have been learning in school. And therefore, as our kids have matured and become voting citizens in the United States of America, many people are unaware right now of the importance of understanding what has taken place before today. What are the lessons of history, and what have those lessons to teach us in terms of how we should respond to the news today, and what kind of reactions we should have, what kind of policies and laws we should have, what our government should do about it, what we as voting citizens should do about it. We're unaware of the anarchy that we're witnessing, that the anarchy we are witnessing today in the streets of Philadelphia and Portland are not without precedent. For example, I'm going to mention three No Kings movements for you. There are many others, but three are obvious. 1793, for example, there was another No Kings protest, otherwise known as the French Revolution. And it took place in the streets of Paris and across the French landscape. This movement not only led to the removal of King Louis, but also the removal of his head. Okay, you know that. And there were some 20,000 others who were killed, most by the guillotine, by the removal of their head. And these executions were carried out by the social justice warriors of that day, the Jacobins, who, not unlike those that are waving Mexican flags in the streets of Los Angeles, were shouting liberty, equity, and fraternity, brotherhood. Okay, they enforced the Jacobins, the anarchists, the Antifas, the Democrat protesters of their day, enforced their No Kings movement with the razor-sharp precision of the guillotine, as they called for democracy. Now, I put that in air quotes, and there's a reason for it. I'm going to cover that later on in the show. Teaser, did you know our founding fathers were not fans of democracy, and that the constitutional republic that they established is not a pure democracy? They never intended it to be, nor did they want it to be, because they understood that a pure democracy was an inferior form of government and was very dangerous. Did you know that? So, again, in 1793, the No Kings protesters overthrew the French government, overthrew the king, through the French Revolution. They not only took the king's throne away, but they took his head away, and they also executed some 20,000 others in like manner. And there were over 100,000 people in addition to that were imprisoned and died in prison as the result of the No Kings movement, all in the name of liberty and equity and fraternity, i.e. brotherhood, democracy. Democracy is what they wanted. And they enforced their democracy with the blade of the sword and the edge of the guillotine. Now, there's another No Kings movement. It's the Chinese Revolution of 1911. And in this revolution, this movement, this removal of the dynasty that had been in existence for some 2,000 years prior to the 1911 revolution in China led to Mao Zedong's great leap forward and the Cultural Revolution, and over 70 million people being killed as the result of Mao's rule, all under the banner of the CCP, the Communist Chinese Republic. But it's not really a republic. It's a democracy. In fact, they call it the People's Democracy to this day. So the 1911 No Kings movement led to Mao and the killing of 70 million people under the banner of the People's Democracy, in quotations. The 1793 No Kings movement was the French Revolution. It led to the execution of the king, the removal of his head, likewise that of 20,000 others, and 100,000 people dying in French prisons as the result of the king being dethroned with no adequate power to supplant that king, to replace that king, to sit on the throne, other than the rule of the gang, the rule of the masses, what David Horowitz has called the crushing power of the we. Again, the rule of the gang, over and above any other power base. Those two No Kings movements do not play second fiddle in any way to another one. The Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, the Russian Revolution. This was a No Kings crusade that resulted in the execution of the Tsar, Nicholas, and his wife, Alexandra Romanov, as well as their 5 children who were lined up in the basement of a house by the Red Square protesters, and they were shot and then stabbed if they didn't die of their initial gunshot wounds. These children, that's the way they were executed. The justice, and I put that in air quotes too, meted out by these precursors of Antifa, set the stage for Vladimir Lenin and Joseph Stalin's slaughter, their subsequent slaughter of 20 million Russian citizens, all for the greater good of, wait for it, you've heard it before, wealth distribution and economic fairness, all under the banner of democracy, the rule of the gang. So, if you feel like you've had a deja vu thought or emotion as you watch these protests, these riots in the streets of LA and other cities across the United States, there's a good reason that you're feeling a sense of deja vu. Yeah, you have seen this before. You've seen it in France, you've seen it in China, and you have seen it in Russia. The lessons of history are very clear. When the rule of the gang rises up and crushes all dissent, under the banner of democracy, under the banner of equity and brotherhood, and ultimate untrammeled liberty. If there is no other moral foundation to control the masses, blood flows in the streets. That's the history of the No Kings movements. Now, before we get into the Founding Fathers' view of democracy, I want to talk about the fact that you have this sense, we also have this sense, in addition to deja vu, this sense of there's a fox in the henhouse here. You know, who's controlling this? Who's pulling the strings behind the curtain? Who's bankrolling this? Now, you might think that a movement that explicitly condemns the political involvement of billionaires like Donald Trump and Elon Musk, which the No Kings movement does, this is one of their primary causes. This is why they tell us they're doing this. We shouldn't have billionaires influencing our political system, they say. You would think a movement that condemns the billionaires like Musk and Trump would eschew any financial involvement from similarly wealthy fat cats, wouldn't you? Wouldn't you think that? Well, if you do think that, you're wrong. In fact, the No Kings marches of 2025 are anything but a common man's operation that they're pretending to be. Quite to the contrary. Of being spontaneous protests by everyday working class people, these demonstrations are bankrolled by 2 specific billionaires, George Soros and Hans-Jörg Weiss. George Soros and Hans-Jörg Weiss. And Weiss is W-Y-S-S. Now, who are these people? You probably know Soros. You may not know of Weiss as well. Soros is, of course, the notorious progressive billionaire who's used his great wealth to blatantly interfere with the economies and political affairs of multiple countries across the Western world, primarily the United States of America. And this is easy to confirm. This is easy to confirm whether you're left, right, progressive, center. It doesn't matter. You can confirm what I'm saying right now is fact. Just go search George Soros's Open Societies Foundations. That's Open Societies Foundations. And you'll find out that he has given hundreds of millions of dollars to left-wing causes in his effort to destabilize America's constitutional system of law and order, as well as our economy. That is a fact. And as far as Weiss, he's a Swiss billionaire who has provided equal funding through his Burger Action Fund, B-E-R-G-E-R Action Fund, the Burger Action Fund. He's given hundreds of thousands of dollars to the 50501 project, which, as you know, is behind the organizational system of the No Kings movement. So if you take the records of these 2 billionaires, they show that at least $500 million, and again, confirmable, At least $500 million from these two cash cows alone have funded the riots that you're watching in Los Angeles and Seattle. And here we have two of the wealthiest men in the world paying for the political protests against wealthy men being involved in political protests. Does this does this seem wrong to you? If it isn't the quintessential poster child of the pot calling the kettle black, I don't know what is. These foxes, Soros and Vice, are in the henhouse and they're smiling with a hungry grin as they fatten up the chickens, who are mindlessly clucking about their pretended predators. So they're funding these people waving these flags on the top of burning cars, but they're smiling. They're smiling knowing that these idiots are nothing but clucking chickens that are obediently panicking everybody else around them about pretend predators, when the fox is really George Soros and Vice and anybody else who understands what's going on right now in terms of them bankrolling these movements. So again, the No Kings movements are not without precedent. There is a fox in the henhouse, and we should recognize this as not only historically taught, but biblically taught. You don't have to go back to the late 1700s or the early 1900s for your examples. You can go all the way back. You can go all the way back 3,000 and 4,000 years to the book of Judges in the Old Testament. In fact, the book of Judges ends with these words. These are the last words in that biblical book. In those days, there was no king, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And in those days, there was no king, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. This is a millennia old statement that warns of the social collapse that befalls any nation that abandons the objective order inherent in God's revelation, i.e., the self-evident truths that are endowed to us by our Creator. When you dethrone the king, the objective order of God's revelation, and you have nothing to put back on the throne other than yourself and your selfish motivations, the rule of the gang, it does not end well. You don't get freedom. You get fascism. You get crushed by the collective demand of those who rebelled, burned the cars, waved a foreign flag, and took over your culture and your society. The proof is in the pudding. The French Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, the Cultural Revolution, the Great Leap Forward, the People's Democracy, wealth redistribution, economic fairness and justice. These are all moves that are led by the rule of the gang and anarchy. These No Kings movements did not end well for millions and millions of people who lost their heads and lie dead in mass burial sites now across the world. The moral and spiritual chaos unfolding in America's streets right now, under the banner of the No Kings movement, is precisely what John Adams said some 200 years ago when he said this, and I quote, "Remember, democracy never lasts long. It soon wastes, exhausts, and murders itself. There never was a democracy yet that did not commit suicide." Close quote. John Adams. And John Marshall followed on his heels and said the exact same thing, essentially, when he, quote, said, "Between a balanced republic and a democracy, the difference is like that between order and chaos." To paraphrase, if you've got two governmental systems, a balanced republic or a democracy, it would be akin to comparing order, a republic, a balanced republic, balanced meaning it is grounded in an objective moral truth. A balanced democracy, a balanced republic compared to a democracy is akin to comparing order to chaos. Again, you're seeing it in the streets right now. And back to John Adams. He also said, "Our Constitution is made only for a moral and religious people and is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." Now, why did he say that? Well, let me paraphrase Adams if I can take that liberty right now. There will always be a king, it will either be Christ or chaos. Or in the words of the immortal Bob Dylan, we're always going to serve somebody. It may be the devil or it may be the Lord, but you're going to serve somebody. Dethrone God's objective order under the banner of no kings and replace it with the rule of the gang, chaos, Antifa, anarchy, and there will be hell to pay. There will be blood in the streets. Freedom will be lost. Private property will go away. Liberty will be a thing of the past. Fraternity and brotherhood will become a joke. It'll be us against them, pitting one group against another, blacks against whites, men against women. The balkanization of our culture and our country. Does it all sound familiar? This is what is pushing the No Kings movement. Donald Trump is not a king. He is the elected president of the United States of America. Donald Trump is really irrelevant in this debate. What the No Kings movement is after is anarchy, chaos, because they know George Soros and Vice and the other billionaires that are pulling the strings behind the curtain know that if they can create enough chaos that someone will ultimately be chosen by the masses to step in and solve the problem. And then you really will have a despot. You really will have a tyrant. You really will have somebody like Stalin, Lenin, Mao, or Robespierre telling all of us, you will submit. You will submit. You will bow to the power of the new king, or you'll lose everything, perhaps even your life. We need to learn the lessons of history. He who does not is doomed to repeat them. I'm Dr. Everett Piper, and this is The Rebellion.